Hi there, this is the video abstract for the piece called Rethinking History and Memory, which was published in Human Relations in 2021. My name is Stephanie Dacker. I'm Professor of Strategy at the University of Birmingham. I'm one of the three co-authors of this piece, which I'm just presenting on behalf of my co-authors, Michael Rowlinson of the University of Exeter and John Hassard of the University of Manchester. To give you a brief overview of the piece, essentially we're looking at the question of how we can conceptualize historical approaches and consider the different options we have, both in terms of key conceptual insights from historiography. By historiography, we mean the sort of theory and practice of writing history, as well as the methodological insights that also come out of the practice of history and the writing on how history is written from the field. We feel that as historical approaches have become more common in organization studies, some of these have sometimes not been properly implemented, perhaps somewhat misrepresented or indeed overlooked. So we propose that articles, research projects, any studies that use historical approaches in the field of organization studies ought to be engaging with what we call historical reflexivity, meaning to consider how concepts and methods have evolved also in the discipline of history. In particular here, we focus on the relationship between history and collective memory, which is widely discussed both in organization studies and in history, and also the distinct methodological choices between archival and retrospective methods that are often associated with the two different approaches, but which we will argue we can actually consider separately. So how do we conceptualize the past? History and memory, we argue in this paper, are essentially two very different ways of thinking about the past. So where history is what we learn about the past, memory is really the past that we live in, the things that are still present, that seem to just very recently precede the present, but have a degree of continuity. So it's a past that is continuously here with us. These are sort of collectively shared representations of the past. The past is here also somewhat malleable, and present-day concerns change how the past is actually being represented. In contrast to this, history as the learned past deals with a past that is very distinct from the present, that is not continuous. It's seen as finished and separate from the present. So as a result, it requires reconstruction through traces that remain in the present, and that's really what historical methods focus on. And these traces of the past, and this is very essential to historical methods, need to be verifiable. Now, very often these two concepts of the past are also equated with methodological approaches to researching the past. This is really what we argue in this piece should actually maybe not be done, because it allows us a much greater degree of insight and more theoretical novelty. So in terms of researching the past, archival methods are very heavily associated with the conception of history as, the learned past, something that is distinct. So archival methods really investigate the traces of the past we still find in the present, and here data is importantly referred to as sources. These sources need to be triangulated with other sources as a form of verification to ensure that these are accurate, they're not fakes, and they represent a sort of intersubjective view of things. These historical sources are usually maintained in archives, hence archival methods. Now, retrospective methods are primarily things like interviews and ethnography. They tend to focus on eliciting sense-making. They may be focused on maximizing accurate recall, but they need not be. For example, oral history may very well align itself with historical methods in the sense that they are considering collective memory as a historical source, but they're very explicitly retrospective in nature. Now, by actually distinguishing between these conceptualizations of the past and the way in which we can research the past, we develop 4 different approaches that we call modes of inquiry. The first one of this is historical organization studies, which is now very widely known. Here we consider this as historical accounts of the past that are reconstructed from sources. We see that social documents, so what is classically used in archival methods, are preferred in this mode. Now, on the opposite end of the spectrum, diagonally across, we have retrospective organizational memory. Now here, these are approaches that focus on accounts of memory in the present, which are reconstructed from interviews, observations, and artifacts. So this is where we have a close alignment between the concepts of the past and the research methods that we would usually expect. What our paper here in human relations seeks to contribute is really two modes of inquiry that are somewhat different and perhaps more angular. First of all, retrospective organizational history, which is probably the least well represented approach, actually uses historical accounts of the past, reconstructed from individual and collective recollections. And here, this is an attempt to use retrospective methods to recreate the past. This is very important because we have a range of subjects and issues that are heavily under-researched, alternative organizations, settings in which you may not be able to get archival sources, settings in which also we might find a degree of underrepresentation of organizational research work, such as informal entrepreneurs in a subsistence setting, especially in non-Western countries. On the other side of the spectrum of historical organizational memory, so this is something that we see more often now in research, these are really accounts of memory in the past, reconstructed from archival traces. Here we find narrative sources are being preferred. So we learn a lot about how, say, temporality, past, present, future, is perceived and constructed in the past. And this often applies in many ways to the present and allows us to tell a story of a much broader historical genesis. Now, our contributions in this piece are really around these modes of inquiry. We believe these offer greater theoretical rigor by distinguishing how we can approach the past conceptually and in terms of methodology, and not just align these two unthinkingly. So, for example, with retrospective organizational history, we can really provide a better insight into marginalized groups and communities and how they organize in the way that also they see and remember themselves and their activities. It has the potential here to highlight the often ethnocentric and gender-biased nature of organizational theorizing by opening up a much broader set of approaches, also to the past and to things that are important for communities and individuals in terms of identity. So with this article, really, we introduce key epistemological and methodological concerns from historiography, hence historiographical reflexivity, into organization theory that we believe otherwise haven't been very well represented so far. Thank you very much for listening. Hope you enjoy the read.